roles for 39 of those years in many international roles, including energy and sustainability. I ran all product research and development in Europe for 2.5 years, was based in Germany, and we had design centers in Italy and the UK, as well as Germany and the Netherlands. So kind of a soft spot in my heart for Europe. I also spent quite a bit of time around the world, serving as a senior fellow at the World Resources Institute. We worked with over 50 cities and countries all around the world, from Africa to Asia and around a couple times. So this is a topic that I have had strong interest in for many years. What I'm going to do is, first I'd just like to introduce a few folks who are on the call. May not be able to see them if you're looking at my slide, but I'd like to first recognize Gina Ennin as my co-lead of this effort at ASHRAE. She's on holiday today. I'm not sure she'll be joining the webinar, but Blake Ellis is on, and he is the co-chair of the Center of Excellence for Building Decarbonization at ASHRAE. And I'd also like to introduce Lyle Walker, who is our program manager for the program at ASHRAE as well. Everyone's excited to understand how this material and the program which we're launching will be received by our international ASHRAE colleagues around the world. All right, well, it's not advancing now. So I'm going to first just spend 2 slides giving an introduction to the Center of Excellence for Building Decarbonization. You may know it as the Task Force on Building Decarbonization. We went from being an ad hoc sort of temporary task force to a committee within the ASHRAE global structure called the Center of Excellence. I'm going to talk a little bit about the current situation regarding international building codes, particularly in the global south and emerging economies. I'm going to introduce a new project that we are kicking off this year on flexible building code frameworks. This is a tool, a knowledge product that ASHRAE is working with partners on to provide support to introduce and develop building codes around the world. Somebody jumping in? No? Okay. We'll talk a little bit about next steps in that program and how you might participate in one way or the other in this initiative if you have interest. And then finally, we'll open it up for questions and discussion. I'm particularly interested in the discussion. Just by looking at the names on the attendees here, I would really love your input, feedback, honest criticism, advice, everything related to the plan that we're about to set off on. So we view this as a tremendous opportunity to get feedback, not just present information. A couple words about the Center of Excellence. There are 4 key focus areas for the center and its role of advancing thought leadership in building decarbonization around the world. It centers around a knowledge resource hub, which is increasing on a quarterly basis with new publications and training materials on building decarbonization. I participated in the original position document committee to develop ASHRAE's position on building decarbonization. The center also focuses on technical tools, which this project will focus on at the intersection of standards, as well as education and the position document. Everyone on this call, I'm sure, knows that ASHRAE is a global leader in standards in the built environment, has been for a number of years. This is just a highlight of some of the incremental updates that have already occurred or are in process for a number of standards. I love the saying that I heard a number of years ago that the nice thing about standards is you have so many to choose from, which is, of course, ironic. And One that I'd just like to highlight is the new standard 240p, a proposed standard, which is a standard method for evaluating greenhouse gas emissions in buildings through design, construction, and operation, the whole life cycle of carbon emissions within the built environment. That is out. That has been out for draft review. Comments are being processed, and that really provides a foundation for future net zero ready or net zero codes. So let me just briefly talk about the challenge. The IEA has a very strong focus on buildings and always have. I served on their industry advisory board for a number of years. And in their net zero scenario, they specifically state that all countries will have to implement national building codes, which they view as one of the key levers towards meeting a net zero carbon scenario for the planet, along with enabling policies and programs that rapidly shift the market towards deep energy efficiency, which ASHRAE has obviously been interested in for 130 years, zero carbon emission targets, electrification of heating, renewables, integration, and then demand flexibility. They go on further to provide greater detail on what those targets need to be, such as space heating and cooling needs to fall at least 40% and 30% by 2030 compared to today. And the fossil fuel heating will have to be largely, perhaps not completely, but largely phased out in new construction starting in 25. That's very consistent with the ASHRAE position that new construction in the built environment on a global basis should be net zero or net zero ready by 2030. Space cooling is going to double. And a lot of that's going to happen in emerging markets and developing countries. And there is a huge and growing focus on cooling at the COP starting this week. In the Buildings Pavilion, which opens on Thursday, there's going to be a huge focus on both cooling as well as the built environment. Good news. And there is some good news. There's been an increase in 30% of the number of countries with building energy codes since the Paris Agreement in 2015. A third more. That's great. Efficiency improvements and codes in buildings are the second most frequently cited strategy in country NDCs. Those are the contributions that are committed as part of the Paris nationally determined contributions. So that's great. Renewable energy is number one. I guess no one's surprised about that. But buildings are rising in prominence on a global scale. And there's strong building sector momentum, including last year. The buildings breakthrough was announced, and here's a picture of those at the COP, announcing that important new initiative with wide global acceptance. So that's the good news. The bad news. At this point, only 26 countries have adopted mandatory energy codes at the national level for all building types. All right. Now, that's a pretty high bar. All building types, residential, commercial, at a national level, but a quarter isn't going to get us to the goal. 2.4 billion square meters of floor space were built last year without meeting any energy-related performance requirements, okay? They were just built. Some are great buildings, some aren't so great. But without regulations, it would be hard to predict that most of those buildings are up to the highest practical, cost-effective standards. 82% of population growth is going to, through 2030, is in countries without energy codes. All right. So that 82% of the growth is without those performance requirements encoded in law and regulation. And actually, since 2010, even though we have improved, we've improved only 7%. And if you've seen the projections of the IEA and the World Bank and others, we need to go a lot faster than 7% in 13 years. In fact, part of the building's breakthrough is a commitment to double the rate of energy efficiency improvement over the next 10 years. And Last week, there was a report that we didn't do it. We're still about 1% improvement per year, and we should be at 4% per year. We have a lot of work to do. So these are some nice charts that I couldn't possibly generate, and these are charts from the World Bank that basically give you some visual indication of which countries have some standards, a unified building energy code, and where we have like basically almost no data. 88 countries have mandatory codes in at least one city, and 54 countries have some standards, but 55% of building codes haven't been updated since 2015. 8 years, over half the countries haven't advanced or updated their building codes. With respect to stringency, just looking at building envelope as one obvious area for building codes, you see an awful lot of gray there, but 70 countries have requirements for building envelope, 54 with requirements for HVAC, and 60 for water heating and lighting. This thing on my screen out of the way. That's much better. So ASHRAE noticed this, and at COP28 in Dubai, our president at the time, Ginger Scoggins, attended a press conference where ASHRAE announced this new initiative that I'm describing today. She's quoted as saying, "We're retooling the focus of our existing standards to address embodied and operational carbon," which is certainly the way the world seems to be going. Yes, ASHRAE is about energy efficiency, but much more than that. And ASHRAE is building on 90.1 to create a streamlined, flexible building standard framework to help countries in the global south develop their own consensus-based building codes, with the target being achieving zero carbon ready by 2030. So that was the public announcement of the initiative that I have been working on ever since. So what have we heard since we announced this, and the basis for the announcement? This is what we've heard around the world at regional meetings, at CRCs. We have a global advisory panel for the ASHRAE Center of Excellence. And we've heard these over and over again, and we're absolutely taking them into account as we plan for the future. This one is usually said to us in public gatherings with a bit of emotion. Please just don't translate ASHRAE 90.1 into a local language and assume you're done or that you've solved the problem, right? Translating a 500+ page document with appendices into a local language is not implementing a code. Don't assume an old version of an existing code is sufficient. We want to leap ahead of existing codes, and that's where the picture comes from there. A lot of us have started referring to this as a leap code. A leap code isn't slowly catching up to where the most advanced building codes are in the world, which many are in Europe and particularly the Nordic region, and in the United States and some jurisdictions which have stretch codes and go beyond the basic model code. They want to be on a path where they can quickly go beyond basic energy efficiency and address carbon and embodied carbon. And sort of like a famous example is in South and Central America, where they didn't have very good telephone infrastructure. So they skipped it. They skipped putting in copper at telephone lines and immediately invested in cellular. And everyone has a mobile phone, and they sped up by decades. That's what we need in building codes. Don't just provide the language. We need to be able to implement and manage compliance. Yes, it would be nice to be handed a perfectly crafted and suitable building code, but there's a lot more to a successful building code than just regulatory language and a regulatory environment to implement it. We need training for code officials. We need to train the entire value chain. We need to track compliance and effectiveness. Don't develop a building code for emerging economies. This one was also said with emotion. Don't develop a code for us, develop a code with us. And that's absolutely a key success for here. It would be a bit inappropriate to put a bow around a draft building code and say, here you go, good luck. But do help get the right people in the room. One thing every country has learned that you have to have the right stakeholders involved, or building codes will be underutilized or completely unacceptable. Okay, so let's dig into some of the details. Here is what we have committed to do. The framework, if you will, develop an interactive building codes assessment tool where we can work with local partners in a collaborative workshop environment with the key stakeholders to really understand the country's needs and aspirations, as well as the current and future capabilities to support building codes. Number two, develop a facilitator's guide in the workshop materials for local translation by a national partner organization. Just having a document, publishing it, releasing it at the COP or at an ASHRAE meeting, that would be nice. Probably not too many people would buy them at the ASHRAE bookstore, and isn't going to solve the problem. This is more of a process than it is a product or a document. Prepare and participate in a collaborative stakeholder workshop in a pilot emerging economy country. We are actively trying to target specific countries that have a strong interest in this. I've got a little surprise announcement later in the day in that regard, and then support other pilot country partners in developing recommendations for the building code development, implementation, training tools, and support policies. And you need all of those in order for building code to be successful. All right, let's go through the framework in a little bit more detail, not too much. Now, I had 4 questions. Those are the 4 questions that need to be answered in order to develop a building code. So the question of why, in our particular framework, it starts with a focus on what the building decarbonization impacts are. The impacts are many, yes. Energy reduction, of course, carbon reduction, but also resiliency, improving health, safety, economic development. There are lots of impacts building codes have in a positive way. So they need to be quantified and prioritized. The what? Those are the measures. What technical measures are we going to focus on in order to deliver those decarbonization impacts? The how, that's where you get into, so what kind of code are we going to develop? Is it just a code, or do we need enabling policies that'll actually drive adoption of the code and improve compliance? And also there's capacity and capability building around that code implementation and code compliance perspective. That's as important as smart choices on what the technology measures are. Who? Well, has to be stakeholder centric. We need all the right people in the room. And I've got a case study later that I'll talk about where I think we did that in a very positive and productive way. And the government needs to make commitments to the policies as well as to the resources necessary. Now, let's dig a little deeper. So the beginning is to identify those outcomes, whether they be environmental, economic, resiliency, health, safety, workforce development, supply chain, you name it, and figure out what the priorities are. Now, We have some experience within ASHRAE of doing this. I don't know if many of you have heard of the decarbonization strategy game, but it was a tool which I actually developed about a year and a half ago, which leveraged the expertise of the Task Force for Building Decarbonization to uh, essentially be the survey body of and evaluate both needs and best practices in building decarbonization. And then we took that information and created a game where everybody goes through and evaluates these things. And the closer you match to the priorities of the TFBD, the better your score. And if you have the top score, you win a prize. At the ASHRAE meeting in Tampa, that was a plastic little Barbie doll size heat pump. But anyway, here's just an example of a range of drivers that cover both environmental, financial, and other things. And this is what the TFBD prioritized them at the time. Something like this would be done in the target country with the stakeholders to get an assessment of what's most important and who thinks what is most important. The next part of the framework is really a focus on the building technology measures. That's the world we live in most every day, and includes the best practices across building planning, design construction, efficiency, electrification, renewables, operational measures, and other things that are specific to a given country. Um, two references that we've used in pulling together this component of the framework. One is Decarbonization Pathway from the World Bank. They described a stepping process that goes from introducing basic passive design requirements like building envelope and lighting and things through and then introducing the enforcement mechanisms on those basic passive elements to tightening efficiency, replacing fossil fuel with electric equipment, introducing singularity and embodied carbon, and then finally ending up with requiring net zero carbon building standards. Um, that's a very logical pathway. We described something very similar in ASHRAE's position document. Here's a little bit more detail. If you double click on some of those elements, you see specific technical measures. The strategy game, which we developed at ASHRAE, coincidentally, looks very, very similar, where we go from project planning, project development, construction and renovation, passive active, facility management, and then renewable energy. What you're seeing here are the results, again, of the 55 or so members of the ASHRAE Task Force on Building Decarbonization. Their prioritization of these measures based on their potential impact to improve building decarbonization. Green would be the highest. Things like building thermal envelope, low carbon building materials, low GWP refrigerants, electrification, obviously, and high performance HVAC, but also things like retrocommissioning and demand flexibility. These can all potentially be integrated into building codes, but while this map may be considered somewhat authoritative due to the expertise of the task force, it needs to be the map for the given country and their stakeholders and where they are and what's important to them in their climate and the politics of the day. So just an example that I think we know how to do this. We need to make this accessible for more than just a game, but to actually use as a tool to develop codes. Next is policy and code methodologies. Even if we had a solid list of which measures we want implemented in the future to improve decarbonization, there are a myriad of ways to put those into a functional code, including prescriptive, thou shalt do it this way, performance, don't care what you do as long as it delivers performance. Hybrid codes are increasingly popular where some elements like the envelope are prescriptive, but others are performance-based. Will it apply to new existing buildings? Will it be based on energy or carbon? Will there be incentives and permitting things linked to the codes to drive adoption. Will the government use the codes in their own facilities? So here's just a thought experiment. We could come up with infinite variation on this. There's 196 or whatever. I'm sure I'm off by one or two countries. But you know, for instance, a country's first code could focus on commercial office and then in the future incorporate multifamily. We could focus solely our efforts on the framework to hot, humid climates. We could focus on envelope and cooling initially and then add lighting controls later. We may or may not include solar as a requirement for every new construction. We could focus on refrigerants because we love them and because they are important, 2+% of global emissions in the built environment. And to simplify things, we may focus on energy initially. It could be a hybrid code. We could do training and education or make recommendations and materials for architects, engineers, building owners, and code officials. Benchmarking and incentives are generally a way of driving code adoption and success. And then government needs to step up and demonstrate these technologies in their own buildings and procure according to their codes. That's a very reasonable. That is a very reasonable approach. And one example, I think, is yeah. So here's some examples. Like Ghana, for instance, and I believe there are some individuals from Ghana. They were kind of a co-sponsor of this webinar. Their code includes almost all buildings: office, hotel, hospital, healthcare, libraries, convention centers, schools, and commercial. A very broad range of buildings considered. Other countries have only a few. Some buildings like Brunei Darussalam have mandatory codes for government buildings, but it's voluntary in the commercial sector. Those are all variations. Plus, just going back to the technology measures, it's interesting that different countries have different levels of detail. Thailand, Indonesia, Vietnam, and Malaysia, for instance, only have OTTV, the overall thermal transfer value, for the envelopes, no U or R values. And the UK, where a lot of you are, have very detailed, specific component level U targets in the building code there. So again, there will be a lot of variation due to local circumstances and other such things. Next is a real focus on code implementation and compliance. This is a topic all its own, but it's incredibly important for the success of codes and for confidence in the codes and the ability of the industry to adapt and the demand from building owners to require this as part of their projects. Luckily, there's a global group that has come together to develop a tool, a definitive tool, if you will, for building capacity for sustainable and resilient buildings. This was part of the Buildings Breakthrough, the picture I showed before with all the people on the stage with all the country flags. This is the bottom half of our framework. ASHRAE is one of the first signatories to this commitment for building capacity in building codes, and a number of other organizations that you see there, some of the largest A&E firms, as well as civil society and Architecture 2030 and things like that. So we hope to rely mainly on the resources that this group is pulling together, and we are part of that overall development team. And then finally, government commitment and resources. Obviously, the government needs to support it, but it's more than just saying, yeah, you can go do this if you want. They really need to drive it. It needs to be important. It needs to be part of their global policies and their regulatory agenda. And um, so it's not just money, it's not just people, it's not just commitment. It is also policies and putting in things that help support the building codes. Building codes alone would be helpful, not as much if they were combined with other things. This is a map again from the World Bank Group, which shows the type of building. Please, sorry. Oh, okay. Somebody's going to have to yell at me. I can't see hands raised here. So if you want me to stop, Amber, you can just you can jump in. This is an interesting chart. It's really hard to read, but there is a link in the bottom, and what it does is it shows the different types of ways buildings are incorporated into the nationally determined contributions that countries make. And yeah, some countries include a lot of building measures, and others not so much. This is a fascinating chart that I just saw within the last couple days. It's an article in Science, so it's a peer-reviewed scientific journal, lots of technical detail, as you can imagine. But after I started reading the summary, it makes a great case for building codes. It turns out of all the government policies in transportation, industry, agriculture, buildings, vehicles, whatever, building codes scored, if you will, among the highest in its potential to actually have a positive climate impact, and was singled out as one of a handful of policies among 50 or 60 different policies. And here's some of the charts that I pulled out of the appendix, which shows what they do. They're tracking emissions, and it's a calendar, and the little colored boxes in the bottom represent different building-oriented interventions, things that countries have done, like enacting a building code is kind of purple, phasing out fossil fuel, putting a tax on carbon, financing mechanisms, including buildings in the emission trading scheme, fossil fuel subsidy reform, performance standards for buildings. And what you see is dramatic changes where the red lines are in the emissions due to those building-oriented interventions. And as you can see, the things that seem to have the biggest drop in emissions are financial incentives, obviously, building codes, and performance standards. So, and building labeling as well. So, I think this is extraordinary. Reminds me of ASHRAE Standard 15, the measurement and verification protocol, ASHRAE standard, where before the line is your building and after is after the retrofit, right? So nerdy stuff, but really, really encouraging. Finally, at the center of it all is stakeholder collaboration. And I just have a list at the bottom of the various sectors that could and should be involved in the development of a building code and figuring out all the other blocks. Think of it as a board of directors or think of it as an advisory group, whichever you choose, but that'll be absolutely critical. Two case studies, both from the World Resources Institute, where again I was a senior fellow. The one on the left, this is a diagram of a process which we went through with Bogota, Colombia. Turns out Colombia had developed a national building code. No one implemented it. Stakeholders felt it was unimplementable. It was never adopted, and it never really made a big impact. And what Bogota wanted to do in order to advance their own goals was to basically kind of start from scratch and develop their own city building code that would be consistent with the regulatory language, but would have a greater impact. And over 18 months, World Resources Institute and the Green Building Council of Colombia, called CCCS, worked with a large number of stakeholders to do an assessment on what needed to be improved. They developed a model code that was locally applicable to Bogota, which is a high altitude city, 8,000 something feet. They adopted the code at the city level. They implemented the processes and procedures to be able to implement and enforce it. And then they went back and evaluated the improvements, which were many. This process was so successful that they now have other cities like Cali implementing that as a model code for their city, and the national government of Colombia has using it as the basis for the next revision of their national thing. The Pacific Northwest National Lab was really critical. They're the lead lab in the United States around building codes and the analysis of building codes, and they provided support to Colombia for this. The chart on the right is a Pareto chart or just a bar chart of how many participants from which sectors participated in a kickoff meeting to improve the building codes in Turkey. This was Zientep, and a number of other cities got together and wanted to improve their building sector emissions. And this just gives you an idea of, this was roughly 50, well, almost 100 stakeholders that were involved in the development. They produced a zero carbon buildings roadmap with short and medium-term goals to be able to drive further improvement in Turkey, which already had building codes, by the way. All right, so this is the chart. I guess you could call it a placemat, maybe. There's a lot of text on it, but this is the overall framework that we are looking at putting tools and checklists and guidelines and processes around to be able to work with countries. Here's some additional building code resources. Some of the data I showed come from two excellent documents from the World Bank, the Building Code Checklist for Green Buildings, and the Global Data Set on Building Code Effectiveness and Compliance. IEA is also working on a project. They've been tracking building code attributes for about, I don't know, probably 10 years. They're working to put that together into a tool which could not only be used to benchmark the content and stringency and performance of various building codes, but also to provide guidance to countries who are early in the path towards developing more advanced modern building codes. This is a page from the proposal from the ICC and the Building Breakthrough project that we're involved in. So that's work in progress. I think we'll see that sometime over the next year, and that'll be a great resource. So next steps. Good news here. The stage we're at in the project is to develop joint work plans with our collaboration partners. This is not something ASHRAE can do alone. No individual company could do it. Nobody can do this alone. So we know it'll be important to work with other partners. In the last 2 weeks, we learned that the IEA, Energy and Buildings and Construction Building Codes Working Group, which is led by the Pacific Northwest National Lab in the US, but incorporates many members, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, many of the IEA countries, as well as many institutions from a wide range of countries supporting the activity. This is becoming one of the key deliverables over the next year for that working group. So we'll be working with the IEA partners to be able to document a knowledge product around the framework. We just learned within the last week that the United States Department of Energy has agreed to fund a net zero world program. This is where they work with countries to decrease carbon emissions through various sectors. And they announced that a program, which ASHRAE is part of, focused on Indonesia, will also focus on flexible building codes. Indonesia has a building code, but has plenty of room for improvement. And it is a huge country that is growing very, very quickly. So focusing effort there can have a really big climate impact. And then we're partnering with ICC in a number of activities, including the Buildings Breakthrough Project. So how can those on this call, if you haven't left yet in fear or boredom, how could those on this call participate and support these activities? Two main ways. One, the detail you saw in today's presentation seemed like a lot, but we need a lot more detail, and we don't have it at this point. We are building a working group of volunteers across ASHRAE, across countries, and across our collaboration partners. So if you're really motivated to make a technical contribution to this, we would welcome that. There'll be plenty of opportunity to review some of our draft framework documents, whether those be facilitators' guides or tools or guidebooks and things such as that. So just saying, hey, this is interesting. I'd like to be involved at some point when you guys get this thing close to something that can be reviewed. We would love reviewers, particularly those in global south and emerging economy countries. That's where we really need the strong reviews of this material. And then country-based pilots as well. There's an opportunity to participate in person in some of the workshops that we're doing, either by identifying a national partner organization that you think it would be good for ASHRAE to partner with globally and locally, or to participate in the stakeholder workshops. Two positive things have already happened in that regard. The co-chair of ASHRAE 240P, she happened to spend a number of years in the Peace Corps after graduating college in Namibia. And obviously, she's a very senior leader within the ASHRAE infrastructure. And she made a connection with an ASHRAE member in Namibia who has very close government connections. And she learned that they're obliged to update their building code within the next year. So it's perfect timing to be able to jump in and provide assistance to them. Also, the Indonesia project I talked about, Net Zero World, Herlianka is the chapter president in Indonesia, Jakarta, for ASHRAE. And she presented as part of a panel at a workshop to scope out the work in Indonesia, and has committed ASHRAE and her colleagues to be able to support this and take advantage of those close ties to the government there. So two examples where, out of the 60,000 ASHRAE members around the world, as people hear about this, they find opportunities to be able to leverage, bring people in, and bring the knowledge out. So I encourage anyone interested to reach out to me. And we're going to be building a team quickly, and we plan to have significant output over the 18-month time frame. So a plug for the Center of Excellence is my last slide. Below is my email, as well as a link to the Center of Excellence website. So at that point, I think I'll stop sharing so I can see all of you, if anyone's left. Yep, people are still here.
Thank you very much, Clay. I was just keeping an eye on the chat. We've actually got quite a few queries, which is quite good. So I'll start with the first one from um, Abdurrahman, who mentioned that thank you for your insights on decarbonization, building codes and standards for HVAC. Could you please share your expertise and any recommendation on how we, through this ASHRAE Sudan chapter, might collaborate with government bodies in Sudan to develop our own national HVAC code that promotes sustainable practices? Any ideas or lessons from similar initiatives would be greatly appreciated.
Yeah. So, well, I didn't have any specific background in decarbonization. Like most of you, I studied HVAC in college and I started working for an HVAC company. But certainly my work with nonprofits like the World Resources Institute, and I was the interim president of the Alliance to Save Energy in the U.S. as well. I've seen this transition from energy to certainly carbon, climate, and things such as that. Um, Sudan has come up a number of times in my research, and I think I'm just scrolling through my notes here. Nigeria has come up a number of times. They published a code in 2017, but it hasn't been adopted widely. I think the first step is really kind of do some research on what the current status is and then figure out which organizations, government institutions are driving these kind of things. I think ASHRAE has a great opportunity to provide a practical but also technical voice into those discussions. So I hope the materials we're going to develop over the next 18 months can be a great resource to help our members engage in those countries. If for some reason Sudan looks like it might be a great one, and I think Amr taught me more about Sudan and the situation there and the opportunities in energy efficiency and renewable energy than anybody through his excellent presentation at the decarbonization conference in Madrid last year. So I walked out of that very, very excited at the potential to make a really big difference where a really big difference needs to happen. I wish I had a short and easy answer, but I think building codes would be a great way to get forward momentum there.
I was on mute, sorry. Thank you very much. Thanks. There's a follow-up question to that. It's like, dear Clay, other questions. How can we design incentive strategies within these codes to support the adoption of low emission technologies, such as large-scale solar powered absorption chillers, heat recovery, and thermal ice storage for sunless periods, especially in large buildings? Any practical examples or approaches would be highly valuable.
Yeah, financials are very important. I showed those illegible probably charts with the legend behind it, and at least in my browsing through the many charts that are in the appendix of this report, financial incentives are one of the big levers for getting this technology adopted. I think a traditional policy kind of pathway is start with government leadership. Government should demonstrate the use of these technologies. In the United States, we have the General Services Administration, the largest landlord in the world, I think. And they have an explicit program to work with innovators to bring new technologies like the participant mentioned and demonstrate them in their own facilities. That gives the market confidence and experience, and then being able to put in particular incentives or rebates and things like that can help tip a few of the early adopters into doing the implementing it. And what I found over 40 years with like demonstration projects and case studies, it's sort of like rolling a big circle up a mountain, and you need to get the wheel rolling, and then you need to get it up. And once you reach about 5%, then it tends to get easier. The hill flattens and it's easier to push that wheel. So having a mental thought of what are things I need to do to get confidence, Case studies have more impact if they're close to potential customers and if they're in facilities like the potential customers have. And I learned that the hard way over, decades of demonstration and pilot projects in countries all around the world.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Just going through the chat, there's another question. For countries that use OTTV, what could be the best way to persuade policymakers to implement U and R values in the building codes instead? One common comment given is that OTTV makes it simpler for designers to apply and follow. I'm not sure what OTTV are. I don't know if you are, Clay.
Yeah, sure. It's
Yeah.
it's yeah, I wanna get it right. It's overall thermal transfer value, and it's a simplification, essentially. It's an overall sort of metric, easy design parameter around the insulation and but it's not particularly specific, so it doesn't it's an overall for the building as opposed to the components in the building. I think that's an education thing. So that is explicitly covered in the World Bank report that I have a link to. And you can go in at an individual component and metric level and see which countries have implemented them and what countries have implemented them in combination with others, which could provide really great guidance in encouraging countries to adopt more specific things. So just researching for this presentation, I actually found a few additional new references with some really neat insight. We're going to incorporate all of that into our tools and framework.
Perfect. Thank you. Just to go back to the case of Sudan, because I know that the chapter has been quite excited in kind of leading this code initiative. What would you say again? I suppose what can the chapter do to kind of initiate that process? Because as you mentioned, there's a lot of stakeholders in this. You've got the technical people, the academics, the policymakers, the economists, etc. But what can the chapter do as a start to get the ball rolling?
Yeah, I mean, I think roundtables and small scale forums are a nice way to get a discussion started. And I don't think, I mean, some of the workshops we envision in some of our projects where we have a major sponsor and major organizations supporting it are going to be 3-day workshops with 100 to 150 stakeholders. Okay, that's a big initiative,
Yeah.
but you have to start somewhere. And I think ASHRAE teamed up with the local Green Building Society. The Green Building Societies are amazing. A green building national organization punches way above their weight, to use a boxing analogy. They have strong influence with governments. They have very tight connections with the private sector, both technology and equipment suppliers, as well as the real estate industry. So finding something that looks like the local real estate group, the Green Building Council, the ASHRAE, and other standards organizations, and even just a few people from the right ministries, whether the Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Energy, Ministry of Infrastructure, have a forum. Doesn't have to be a big event, but these things take time, but they also need to be incubated. Think about incubating something which could grow over time.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Really helpful. There's another comment on the chat just to make sure that I haven't missed anything. Yeah. I'm a member of a technical committee that work on the adoption of adaptation of 90.1, 90.2 as a national energy code in Saudi Arabia. There are lots of challenges in adapting codes that were developed based on US metric technical research. These codes seem to have never been intended to be used as international model codes. The newer versions are better, but lots of work should be done to have the codes cater for international adoption.
Yeah, agree. And thanks for saying that again, because
Yeah.
we've heard that over and over again. Remember my comment? Don't just translate it into Arabic or whatever language and assume it's going to become the code there. That's why we chose the approach of a flexible framework. All right. Instead of trying to find the perfect code, the idea is to decompose a building code into its requisite pieces and then be able to flexibly connect those things together in a way that it becomes the basis for the legal and regulatory language in the code. Slicing and dicing existing regulatory languages and constructs and metrics and targets and methodologies that are centric to one country or region, and then them being applicable doesn't work. So our hypothesis, and we'll know in a couple of years if we're right, is to decompose standards into these elemental pieces that can be pieced together in a generic way and then translated into the legal language that is necessary to apply to their regulations. It's a big if, but it's not an idea that we came upon solely. Different organizations have independently come to similar conclusions, and we've located each other, if you will, and have agreed to work together to see if this could possibly work. So hear you loud and clear, and we're not planning to do that. Now, I will say Bogota did start with 90.1, and the expertise of a national lab that's supported 90.1 for 20 years. So they sort of had special knowledge in this, and the outcome was successful. I don't think that outcome is general, though.
Thank you very much. No, I agree with this fully because I suppose for a code, the stuff that doesn't change is the engineering sciences. So it doesn't really change. It's the same everywhere. Heat loss is the same in Saudi, in UK, in US, so it doesn't change. But I suppose I've learned, so my background is full engineering technical, very technical even,
Mhm.
boring kind of engineering. So last few years I've been more
Is there
towards
an
the so
exciting kind?
I think I've been doing it for so long that that's it. I find it really boring. So now I've been more towards the social science, and it's quite interesting to see how the social scientists kind of,
Right.
I think their role is very important,
Yes.
if not the most important role, because they're the ones who would kind of make those codes resonate with the government, resonate with the adopters, resonate with the companies, house owners, etc., all the stakeholders. So for example, now in the UK, the way that we communicate energy, it's not always climate, and I think that it became automatic that we say, oh, climate change is net zero, or decarbonization. It just became an autopilot kind of approach. But if you kind of adapt it in a way that resonates, so for example, recently with the geopolitics in Europe, if you mention energy security, that kind of a little bit more resonates with people. It's like, okay, yeah, my bills are quite expensive, so yeah. Okay, I'm buying that because what you're saying is you're saying reduce my bills. Elsewhere, something like energy poverty, say, okay, if you adopt these standards, you'll pay less bills. So therefore, the money that you goes to your energy, you can invest it in businesses, luxuries, etc. So the codes, or at least the science or the engineering sciences, could just be, the numbers, but it needs to be written in a way that resonates with the adopters and the legislators mainly.
Yep. Completely agree. Completely agree. And that's why the top box on our framework is all about the outcomes, right? What is it you want to do, and how can you achieve multiple of them and achieve synergies through building regulations? I mean, yes, we're using the term codes, but really what we want is a regulatory environment in the built environment to basically drive decarbonization and provide many, many additional benefits. Focusing on those benefits will be absolutely key. So that initial little workshop that we talked about, it would be really nice to have some more social scientists, facilitators, folks with that kind of background that really understand motivations and behavior to support the meetings. We hope to build that into our framework as well, because it is often missing. Having the person with the most degrees and the deepest technical knowledge leading these things is probably not a wise choice.
Yeah, fully agree. Fully agree. I don't see any more questions, but is anyone got a comment or question that they would like to contribute with? I don't see anything moving at all.
Okay, well, we've been talking a long time.
Perfect.
It's a lot of information. So I would just like to thank everyone who attended today, and please reach out. You have my my email, and please look at the resources on the Center of Excellence for Building Decarbonization. I see my good colleague Gina Anand has joined. I see her name in the bottom there. Thanks, Gina, for joining. She is a partner in moving this initiative forward at ASHRAE. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you so much, Clay. That was amazing.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you very much, Clay, for your time. Again, very, very super interesting session. Again, makes us step away from the traditional technical side and focus on the implementation uptake side, which is the critical aspect, to be honest. This is what we do it for people to do it. Thanks for your time. And just to let you all know, I've recorded this. I think I'll stop the recording now, and I'll upload it on the ASHRAE UK YouTube channel. So you could visit any aspect of the presentation there. And again, thank you all for your time. And we also thank Sudan and Ghana and Nigeria for also being co-hosting this. We kind of needed your input. It's always good to have this diverse context to steer stimulated conversation. So thank you all for your time, and see you in future presentations. Thank you.
Thank you, Suleiman. Thank you, Clay Nestor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Clay. Thank you. Thank you very much for your kind presentation. Thank you.